and some of the very specific things that come up around recovery settings, around recovery communities and recovery sites. Certainly that gets, spread out amongst a variety of different, that's a spectrum of different locations, right? And so everybody's going to have concerns and emergencies and things that are specific to the site that they work at. And I'm hoping as we go, we can sort of talk about that and make it a bit interactive. I think that we'll sort of dive right in, but a couple of things that I really want to bring up as themes maybe as we go through, right? One is emergencies and emergency settings with the population that we have. I mean, with everybody, but especially with the population that we have can destabilize and re-traumatize clients. And so it's something that we have to really consider when we're doing emergency planning. The other is the more confident our staff can be on what the protocols are or on how to respond to things, the more confidence that we can build in them, the more we can lower anxiety, both leading into things and while emergencies are happening. And so we're going to talk about some tips and tricks around that and some ways of creating that confidence, but I'd love to hear your input as well. And we want to, really, as we're thinking through these things, I don't want it to be theoretical. I want it to be stuff that's practical, supportive, and really focused on scenarios that come up for us. So if there is something that, you've dealt with or you're worried about, like, be sure to jump in at any time and say, like, hey, Bill and Tristan, Sarah, I'm concerned about this random thing happening. What I know is we come up with the best laid plans, and then, they rarely survive the first training, right? Because 1,000 tiny details factor in that we had never thought of before, and that's really important. So, yeah.
Bill, you just went mute.
It feels personal. Thanks, Sarah. I think Teams is out to get me. A couple of things we really want to focus on is how do we create safety, right? And safety is a few different layers as we're talking about emergency response plans, and specifically like trauma-aware emergency response plannings, right? And safety looks like physical safety. Obviously, we want people to not be injured or further injured. We want to be able to manage those scenarios as well as possible. We don't want staff to, run into dangerous situations and get physically injured and reduce their capacity. And we want the recovery environment to stay as wherever possible, obviously, stay as whole as possible and as supportive as possible. Because the other piece of safety is that emotional safety and that ability to be resilient to previous traumatic experiences, right? So we want to create a safety plan that honors that and looks at it. We'll talk a little more about that. We also, as much as possible, want to support continuity during stressful events. And that looks like two things. That looks like the response that we have has continuity. So between training, between different scenarios, people understand what's going on, so they're not in the uncertainty and chaos nearly as much, and they're more calm, more level. We also want to support the continuity in terms of maintaining the continuity of treatment and the recovery environment as much as possible. Again, so it's not destabilizing. Also, so that wherever possible, the work of other folks is not being disrupted. I've talked about this already. I have a tendency to talk over, the slides, so we'll just bounce back and forth. My brain's a lot like pop-up video. We'll just all be along for the ride. But planning reduces re-traumatization, right? And it reduces chaos and it reduces stress, right? And so as we're thinking about building some of these protocols to be, maintain safety and continuity and reduce trauma, we want to think about practical stuff. What do we do first? Who's leading? How do we support clients emotionally through the process? We want to think about communication being clear, being steady, being really reliable. We also want to think about how we communicate in terms of how is this being received, right? And so, you know, there are environments where it makes sense to be, and obviously emergencies where it makes sense, will have to be sort of a little bit elevated and a little bit louder. But as much as possible, we want to think about concepts like remaining calm. We don't want to be shouting. We don't want to be, bursting into people's environments at a very high energy level. We want to be calm and grounded and presenting as much as possible that way, because I really believe my experience has been in the recovery environment that our clients, members, residents, whatever the terminology you use at your site, take on our energy, right? They respond to what we're bringing to the table. And if we're coming in a semi-panicked state, they're going to be in a semi-panicked state, right? Tristan, feel free to jump in anytime, man. I will ramble on if you don't. So no pressure.
Yeah, no worries there, Bill. If you don't mind, I just kind of want to jump into what you were speaking on about, the clients and the re-traumatization.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been able to witness firsthand, how um, the demographic of people who are not in early recovery handle with crisis situations. Generally speaking, very well received. Nobody kind of like, um, just speaking very generally, people don't react or are not as sensitive as people in early recovery. So it's super mindful. Uh, it's very important to be super mindful of our demeanor, especially like something as simple as like running towards a location, running away from a location, unless absolutely warranted, can definitely have an impact on the community. Super important to remember too that everybody deals with crisis differently. I've seen some of the toughest guys in a recovery setting, you know, panic, and I've seen some of the most calm guys, some of the calmest guys ever just remain calm in those situations, and vice versa. So you never really know what you're going to get. It's unpredictable, the attitude and the demeanor that people are going to carry in those situations. What you can prepare for and what you can be readily available for is the staff response, right? How staff is going to be trained in those situations. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Tristan. We work in this environment that it means that we have to think about some things that maybe you don't have to think about as much if you're, let's say, at Home Depot or you're working at Staples. One of them is the risk mitigation piece. We'll talk more about this as we go, but we have to not only think about the immediate physical risk caused by the emergency, but if we have to, let's say we have to evacuate, we also have to think about withdrawal management and where are people at medically. We often have clients who are a bit medically unstable. We want to make sure that their needs are cared for, that they're transported in a way that maintains their dignity, but also maintains their health and safety. We want to think about behavioral escalation. To speak to, Tristan's piece, on one hand, we often are working with people who are very comfortable in chaos and crisis because that's where they've been living their life for the last number of years. But some of their learned responses that have kept them alive and kept them safe in the kind of crises they were living in before can reemerge as they're navigating crisis now. And so there's behavioral escalation. Sometimes there's, the risk of shutting down or the risk of anger, the risk of violence. So it's stuff that we need to think about when we're planning and training so that people feel cared for and safe, and that staff do as well, right? I think anything that we bring to the table with staff lets us keep people safe going forward. Right? A couple of things I want to just touch on really quick, and I won't go deep into this. I'm certainly not the subject matter expert. But as you're thinking about your emergency response plans, be thinking about what's required legislatively, what's required in terms of local government and provincial government, and what your responsibilities are, right? Like the Emergency Management Act requires you to prepare for emergencies, requires you to create an emergency response plan, right? Local authority EMR regulations require planning, training, exercises. Look into these things and find out what the details are for your specific type of site and what you need to do to train and manage. I'm obviously super biased. Part of my job is staff training and training for our programs and for safety. But I do think that like the more training we can do and the more realistic and the more creative we can get with our training, the better we are going forward, right? Confident staff equals confident clients. What we know about the populations that we work with is we want to create routine and we want to create stability, right? And predictable environments allow our clients to stay regulated. And if I was to be a bit punny, like I think that's the most important regulation that we talk about, right? Is how do we help our members stay regulated? I'll throw it out to people. How do you think like some of this chaos or some of the unpredictability maybe of emergency response, how does that impact somebody early in recovery, or how might that impact our clients as we're thinking about planning for these things? And I'm gonna just stare at you till you say something.
I've got a little comment.
Please.
So when say that again, ask the question again. Sorry, I need to shut my door.
Yeah.
Hi,
So,
I'll introduce myself. My name is Gilda Souze, and I'm the manager for Neoscan Detox and Treatment here in Muscogee. So,
hi, Gilda.
yeah, we recently got licensed, so I'm just learning about how to create the emergency management evacuation plan in case we need to. And I did kind of skim the surface, but it's good to know that there is some resources on here. So, and what was your question?
The question is like how in an emergency, how does that unpredictability and that chaos that's sort of inherent in emergencies, like what are some of the ways that can affect people in early recovery?
Okay. Well, for us here, we are on reserve, right? So we have a lot of social issues. And what I am seeing, and I'm just going to be straightforward here, that some of our clients are addicted to drama because they're living in that chaotic world, right? That they like to, they can relate, I guess, so to speak, to the drama that's unfolding, like the crisis or I'll give an example. We had a fellow come to our door who was under the influence, and everybody comes running. Oh, we want to see who it is. It's like, no, you can't, right? Go back to where you need to be. So everybody knows each other. Everybody knows where they're from. We have 4 reserves here. We're all connected, but I think for the most part, when an emergency unfolds, and it's true what you said, that a confident staff will have confident clients, right? So when we have these mini crises, not too many, thank God, that we haven't had to have anything like that. But I guess another one is the infection control protocols that we had to put in place because of the influenza. We had a client come in with influenza. So we just right away, come on, we need to do the hand sanitizing, we need to do the masking, we need to do the disinfecting. And thank God it was only one client that, had the influenza. So little crisis, I shouldn't say little, big crisis is like that because this client ended up in a hospital and he's still in the hospital from influenza. So for us, that's like a form of vicarious trauma because he was fine one day and then the next day he was really sick and we had to call the detox and it happened during detox. Had it not happened during detox, I mean, like I swear we would be in a panic, like kind of, because we had that supports with the on-site medical team that were able to assist. So things like that, though, to me, those are crises, whatever, that we need to really take into consideration because they're real. Anything can happen. Like anything can happen at any time. For the clients to witness that, even they were a little bit panicked, but we just rest assured that we're going to do the protocols. You guys let us know when you're feeling sick, and we'll make sure that you're well taken care of, and we'll monitor you. And they felt comfortable about that. But they also got together and they said prayers for the fellow that got sick with influenza. It was really powerful. Like they all came together because they knew him. So it was, yeah, I'm rambling, but yeah,
No,
yeah,
I really appreciate it. I think, I mean, you've touched on a bunch of stuff. I think I can relate to that addicted to drama thing. I think that's been. I mean, you see it on the highway, right? When there's a minor fender bender, everybody slows down to a crawl just to peek
right.
and see what happened, right? And
Rubberneckers.
rubberneckers. So as we think about what's the management plan, I think that's an incredibly important thing to take into account, because things won't go as fast as we want, things won't go as smooth as we want. And the
Mhm.
other thing is that you brought up infection management and control and influenza and the hand sanitizing and all that. I think we're going to talk about risk management here in a minute and risk assessment. And I think it's so important to just wander around your site with a couple of people and just talk about like what are all the risks, because there's things that we don't, like fire and flood, and like we think about that stuff. We don't always think about like influenza or like
Mhm.
COVID protocols, or what do
Yeah.
we do, masking, not masking, what does it all look like? And then that brings up a whole other world of trauma for some folks, right? That was a very
Mhm.
hard time for a lot of people, and there's some residual stuff there. April, I think you have your hand up.
Yeah, hi, I'm April, and I just finished recovery coach training, and I am a team lead for a program that employs peer support workers. But my background is in EMS. So I was an EMT and a paramedic, and we do a crap load of emergency response planning and training. And in my experience, people are looking for a leader, and they're looking to the staff to be those leaders. So in having those plans and processes in place, it provides them with some semblance of a leader. So if that leader is now freaking out just as much or more than the people they're supposedly trying to lead, then it's going to send a very, very negative message saying, I don't have control. I don't know what to do. So that's why these emergency plans have to be very repetitive, because it's only in those repetitive natures and the practice is where they become second nature. And it's where they, you don't like, eventually we go through so much training because when we arrive onto a scene, we are that leader. People are looking at us to save their dad's life or their daughter's life from whatever it may be. And if I'm panicking and looking scared, they're going to have no faith in me and they're going to start freaking out even more. And it's also de-escalating people, because people, it doesn't matter what background you're from, what part of the world you're from, if you have addiction past, everyone resorts back to what they know. So if you were raised in a war-torn country, that's what you know. If people were raised in a gang, they're going to resort back to the things that they know, unless those behaviors have been trained out of them, and that only comes with that repetition. So yeah, people are looking for a leader, so it's important that the leaders know what the hell they're doing, or they can exude the confidence to bullshit their way through and hopefully get through what's going on.
To some extent, both of those are equally valuable. Yes. No,
they're one and the same sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No,
honestly, they are, because you could train for every situation in the entire world and you'll get the one off that you haven't did training for ever, or like 5 years ago and you don't remember. As long as you have that level of confidence, people will believe, especially when they're frightened.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think you brought up another thing, which is that, you know, people revert to what they know, right? And revert to sort of where they've been at. And that's super true for our clients as well. Like it's very true for leaders. It's very true for our clients in terms of, we will often see them do very well in the crisis because they're going back into that place where they're used to dealing with crisis. The problem is, after the crisis is over, they've had that adrenaline hit, they've had that dopamine reaction, they're in that place, and now they're cognitively back in their using phase, right? And so they're presenting as very triggered and very fragile and unstable. But you know, we have to help them sort of get back into that place of regulation.
Yeah, another thing is that aftercare is so important.
Yes.
That's where it was lacking when I was working in EMS, where their aftercare, the follow-up wasn't in place, which led me down the path of becoming an alcoholic, which led to the ending of my EMS career. Because I wasn't dealing with the things that I was seeing, and there was nothing in place. So I was self-medicating in order to deal with what I saw and did at work that day or over time. So it does compound up. So like you were saying, trauma looks different for everyone. Emergency looks different for everyone. So because we don't deem it as an emergency or as a trauma, doesn't mean that it's not for them.
Exactly. I think aftercare has to be part of your emergency response plan, because I think aftercare, like really good quality follow-up, is prevention for future emergencies, right? Whether that's individual or structural. So thank you. I appreciate it. I
totally agree here, Bill, with April also, and just a bit on adding also that, you know, why not to have those proactive approaches where the family physicians at the clinical level, because they are exposed to all sort of a community, they be also being, you know, encouraged to take those specific, I would say, psychological first aid, or maybe, you know, with you also in the recovery spaces, because within a 15-minute appointment, the doctors themselves, they feel so much burnt out that they cannot find out the distress cues, or, you know, what to do if a safety check is needed, or how to prioritize immediate needs. And I see a lot of bridge gap spaces, you know, which could be bridged easily with organizations like yourself coming into contact with the community clinic family physicians in each quadrant, or maybe PCNs, so that it becomes very evident and it's drilled regularly for the family physicians also. There is no connection between the family physicians, the social workers, and the psychologists and the client themselves. And basically navigation is a problem, while there is such a nice resources available there. It's not a shortcoming of resources, it's just that people don't know the navigation pathways, you know.
Absolutely. And Sylvia, you're speaking to my heart. I used to help run a physician training program at a center I worked at. And I mean, it's much like, you know, what April was alluding to in terms of, like, I think physicians, EMS, like a lot of people who are at the front line are given a lot of training about how to support outwardly and not a lot of training about how to support themselves and how to seek out support for themselves. So I mean, I could go off for hours, but Tristan's already given me the Bill, we're on slide 3 of 20 and halfway through look. So I'm going to try to not panic him and move on quickly. But I really appreciate the input. And the other thing I'm going to speak out of turn and promise a thing that Sarah might then get mad at me for, but I think the slides are available to everybody afterwards too. So don't feel like you're going to miss anything or you have to furiously take notes or anything. You can always go back and check out the slides, check out the video, if that's helpful. Yeah, so there's a lot of things that we could touch on in terms of some of the amazing work that that the province does, that municipalities do. The big takeaway I'd like you to have from this slide is that you're not alone, right? In an emergency situation, you're not alone. There is support systems outside of your organization, beyond your building, that are there to be engaged with, to be activated, to help you out, right? I think that I would mostly spend my nights, sort of shaking and sobbing under a desk while humming Tiny Dancer to calm myself if these things weren't in place, right? I would just be a ball of anxiety and panic all the time. But there is a lot of resources that are there to help, whether that's with evacuation, whether that's with acute emergencies like overdose or withdrawal problems, or major respiratory problems like Gilda was talking about. So things are in place. I'll touch on quickly, what are your work site's responsibilities, right? There is a few different things. The HIRA, tailored to looking at not only general hazards, but also specific to recovery hazards, right? Things that are going to come up like overdose, like people sneaking narcotics on site, like major problems which are consequences of people who have been unhoused, right? There's people that may be infection risks, that sort of thing, that wouldn't necessarily often come up if you were, say, working in a regular office environment. Let's go with that. So the sort of hazard assessment is incredibly important. I talked about it earlier, that piece where we want you to spend some time, wander around your site, get a few people involved, have a little bit of fun with it, and think through, what are the things that could possibly come up, and how can we avoid setting ourselves up for some kind of, disaster that way. Create a clear ERP that accounts for emotional safety, that's trauma informed, that's culturally informed as much as possible. There's a balance, right? There's always a balance. We want to be trauma informed, but there's some emergency situations where there's physical realities of, like, you have to evacuate, you have to get out of your scenario, and sometimes you have to do it faster than you would like, right? So the idea is to be as trauma informed as possible. Know your population, know how to work with them, and understand what is going to be the most triggering. When I say a trauma-aware plan, what I mean by that is use principles of trauma-informed care, right? Wherever possible, present some choice. Wherever possible, give people some personal agency, give people some dignity. The way to do this that I find the most helpful, and Tristan probably has a way better idea than me, but you come up with emergency scenario trainings, whether that's for fire or flood or active shooters on site or overdose or and then you run through the training in as realistic a way as possible with the staff. The training itself obviously can be traumatic, so it's a thing that we want to think about. How do we present it in a trauma-informed way? But you navigate through it, you do the best you can, because what you're going to find as you do that is, A, your participants are going to have ways of figuring out how to have some agency and have some choice and have a voice in that policy and that training. You're also going to find a whole bunch of holes that you did not expect were going to exist, that are going to come out of nowhere. And you're going to find all kinds of things like, okay, we never thought that when we were planning an evacuation, somebody would accidentally evacuate into a closet. And so, you'll come up with ways to make it more clear and more calm and more confident the more drilling and training you do. I also encourage people as much as possible, find ways to make training fun, right? These can be really heavy, dark topics. And if we can find ways to have some fun with the training, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a while, but if we can find ways to navigate that, then it becomes a little bit, easier, but it also increases calm and confidence when we get there. Tristan, I missed anything?
No, I feel like they could probably speak on a lot of this for a long time, but quite truthfully, you're hitting a lot of points here. You're making a lot of great insight and suggestions into what an ERP does. I do want to touch on a few things that, going back a little bit, the best laid plans, right? It's like theory versus practice. You can practice theory, you can roll out scenarios till you're blue in the face. At the end of the day, and I really like what was said earlier from the I believe her name, I can't remember her name, but you had mentioned that you were working in EMS, and sometimes you have to be kind of a leader the moment you show up, right? You see this a lot in emergency response scenarios where people will step up, even if they're not the incident command on the incident command hierarchy or the org chart or whatever. When an ERP is created, it's generally created prior to the facility even opening. So you're looking at, those municipal governments that you're reaching out to. Somebody asked a question about what it would be the possible plan should a whole city need to be evacuated in the case of a wildfire. I haven't seen a recovery community that big yet, but when you're talking about a whole community having to be moved, whether it's in the city or out in the outskirts of some rural Alberta town, you're looking at, again, going back to that second slide, you're not alone, right? A lot of what we do involves coordination, liaising, collaboration. You might have site-specific evacuation points. When you're talking internally, you have muster points on site should an evacuation occur. But if you're out in the middle of like rural Alberta, I believe you would have already set up an agreement between the municipality where you would go to the nearest community hall. You'd have water, water set aside. You'd have these negotiations prior to your facility opening, right? So knowing what that looks like, knowing exactly what should occur, having buses readily available. If you have to evacuate 75 guys from your facility, who's going to be your first point of contact, or are you just going to wing it the moment it happens, right? So these conversations need to be had prior to the facility even opening. So this is all like when we talked about HIRA, right? Hazard identification risk assessment. This is all part of it. So typically speaking, there's also there's a part of it that's very geographical. We mentioned Musquecheese being out there. We mentioned, Lakeview. We mentioned New Beginnings. There's a lot of treatment centers that are treatment recovery communities, outpatient programs, detoxes that are currently open and available. I believe every single one of them should have a plan of some sort, whether that's, like I said, for transportation, incident command structure. So who's in charge? Typically speaking, that is your highest form of authority on command. If it's an executive director, if it's the operations manager, these are key points that need to be had, conversations that need to be had. If you haven't done them yet, then I suggest you do them now if you're an operator. Also, too, committees, right? When you talk about committees, having an occupational health and safety committee, having somebody whose whole job is going around identifying risks, whether they be small in nature or potential evacuations, potential gas leaks, tornado, right? Like these are all real life situations that could occur in Alberta, right? So yeah, that's all I wanted to kind of add to. If I forgot anything, I see a couple questions here. Yeah, I'll leave it back to you, Bill.
Oh, I just put up the next slide. You were just rolling so beautifully into it. The other thing that just to add on to what Tristan is saying, I mean, when we were coming up with emergency response plans, a few of us, spent a couple of days in an office, you know, for 12 hours a day, just, coming up with things and thinking of contingency responses. And again, I don't think any of those survived the first actual test and training, right? All of them, skeletons did, but they got improved and changed and grew, and that's good. That's as it should be. The other thing I'd really encourage you, and it's exactly what Tristan said, is get really creative, right? Because it is a problem when if you're looking at a wildfire coming and you have to get 75 guys off site, you're going to need buses, you're going to need vehicles, and during a wildfire, everybody else needs them too, right? So how are you planning that? What is that going to look like? I know, one time, in terms of fire and collapse, I was working at a center and we partnered with a local boarding school that, if there was something happening during the summer when they didn't have any students, then, which was the highest risk of wildfire, then we can use their buses and they would actually host our residents on site, in their dorms. And, then we can work out from there how to get people off. But it's important to get creative. It's important to think of different options and look at things you wouldn't otherwise think of. Tristan, no pressure, man. This is all your slide. I bow to your wisdom.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I just kind of zoned out there. I really liked what you were saying. So how does an emergency response work at a recovery site? Great question. Again, like we're going to go into a little bit of like, we can talk about the preemptive planning, the proactive approach to how we handle these situations. Again, even the best laid plans, right? So when you talk about like who's in charge, situation happens, could be as large as a wildfire, it could be something as like an infection control, infectious disease and control. You're going to have multiple areas. You're going to have, your medical team. You're going to have a site lead. So that could be your, basically your executive director. That could be your operations manager. Your safety lead, typically speaking, is going to be your occupational health and safety guy. Who's the guy who's looking over immediate responses. And then you're going into ICS, which is your your incident command structure. So your incident command structure, I mean, you see this all the time on TV if you've ever watched a SWAT episode or anything law enforcement, you see a whole big bus outside. There's two pieces to this. One is incident command structure is primarily going to be on site. It's going to be on scene. It's going to be on the ground. You're going to be dealing with site level. It's at site levels. Their function serves totally as tactical command and control, immediate concerns, immediate problems, managing the immediate incident site. And EOC is your Emergency Operations Center. Again, these are a lot of analogies, a lot of acronyms. So bear with me, but incident command structure is your on scene, your Emergency Operations Center. In the case of a wildfire, you're looking at the strategic side of it. So ICS is more tactical. EOC, Emergency Operations Center, is going to be more strategic, right? There's the guy sitting there at the community hall planning the next meal for the guys while the wildfire burns out, or planning the transportation back to the site once the fire is cleared. They're more strategic. They're more off-site. They're more virtual. So these are the guys calling all the shots. Call it a figurehead position, but they're the ones calling all the shots, navigating all the resources that are available for the emergency response plan. So again, with Emergency Operations Center, you're looking at more multi-agency, right? It's a multifaceted approach. You're going to be looking at not just your site, but the municipality, right? Bill made a great point of like utilizing, getting creative with like the school. A boarding school was a great example. If you're out in like Musquechies, have you talked to you know, the community hall. Do you have a plan? Also being realistic about, you know, geography. Are you going to pick a building that's right across the street from a potential wildfire, or are you going to pick something about 50 kilometers in the opposite direction? Um, so yeah, and POC, very simple. I don't know why they had to put this in an acronym, but it's point of command. So who's in charge? An incident command structure should always have a lead. So that lead, generally speaking, is going to be the highest authority on site. You never know when an ERP is going to be needed. That could be happening on a Saturday night when there's no management, no leadership on site. You have a team lead. So they're going to be the incident commander. You're also going to be looking at, like, it's right here on the slide here, but you know, we talk about executive director, you know, director of operations. These are the ones that are going to be in charge, the incident commander. But again, being mindful of where you are in terms of, like, is it a weekend? Is it middle of the night? And having all these thoughts and ideas put together through a committee, right? Get your OH&S committee, build one. I know firsthand for myself, I've just pulled people. If you're not doing anything, come join me. We're going to go sit down and do an OH&S committee. Document your minutes. Make sure you guys have, like, open conversation, open dialogue about what are their concerns. And yeah, so just going into the slide, there's a lot here, but basically speaking, there's going to be times too in a situation where you're going to have to pass the baton. If your incident commander is crumbling, or you know, there's so many moving parts, there's always going to be different variables in these situations. You're going to want them to, if you see them struggling, you see them getting over. Everybody has a capacity. Doesn't matter who you are, you're going to have a capacity to operate. You might need to take over for them. So just being mindful of what needs to get done. Clear, consistent communication is super important in the ERP. Talking about radios, you know, what systems do you have in place? Do you have a loudspeaker? Yeah. So staff level, when you're looking into your incident command system, what are the roles and responsibilities of each one, right? Having been in a couple of situations myself, you know, delegation is a huge, huge asset in these situations. You might need to go get two of your team leads to break off and get guys from side A or side B, or you might need to get them to, you know, put shelter in place. You know, they're in the middle of programming. Okay, well, we're staying in here. One thing I do want to add to this too is, like, the dialogue and the terminology that we use, super important. If you work with a community, recovery community where guys have been incarcerated, the term lockdown is never something you want to use in those situations, right? Super triggering, super, maybe not triggering, but can be a traumatic event for a lot of people. I know if you've been incarcerated and you hear the term lockdown, it could bring up a whole mixture of emotions, and I've seen it firsthand. So correct terminology, you know, utilizing a code system, code black, shelter in place. That's what I'm saying over the radio if I need to. If I say lockdown, probably not going to go over too well with residents who've been incarcerated or have had past traumatic experiences with that. So, I mean, I'm not going to get too much into this slide here, but basically, incident commander is going to have direct oversight of emergency response, communication with external emergency services. You're going to make those critical decisions, and basically, the name of the game is pivot, right? You're going to have to pivot in numerous directions. Things change. I've seen firsthand. I had this concern on the site at one point where I had to change direction really quickly. You know, thought it was a medical first aid situation. I'm implementing a shelter in place because what I thought was happening wasn't happening. So making sure that people are aware of those, what the incident commander's role is. Also making sure there's systems in place as well. So some of those systems might be like creating a sign in, sign out for all your staff. If there's an evacuation, how do you know who's missing? Right? If you're a resident, if you have a community center, are you using a member movement sheet, right? Where you're documenting who's in their cabins? Because if something goes awry, fire alarm goes off, you should be grabbing one clipboard for your residents, one clipboard for your staff, and you should have oversight of exactly who is where at what time. As God forbid somebody should be in one of those buildings and you don't know about it, you can't communicate that with the fire department. I mean, you're putting somebody in jeopardy at some point. I know firsthand, sign in, sign out sheets, very like annoying. I mean, staff forget all the time, but they're super important because we want to know if there's visitors on site as well, right? Anybody who's on your site, there should be a written documentation of where they are and that they're gone or they're off site so that you have something to report. You want to pass the next slide there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, wildfires are a good example just because they're so prevalent in Alberta, but there's lots of different types, right? We're talking about like overdose awareness. Scenario planning is a great tool to use, and it's fun, right? Get some staff together, fake a heart attack, drop on the ground, see what they do, right? Maybe not exactly like that, but have some dialogue there, have some like forewarnings that, hey, we're going to do some scenario trainings, and ask questions, get curious, no different than what we're doing now. Evacuation considerations for anxiety withdrawal. Yeah, being very cognizant as well of mobility issues, right? If you guys have somebody who's in a walker, in a cane, have you put them in the back nine, right? Or have you put them close to the building where you could have a little bit more oversight? That I can tell you firsthand, that's the only time I really like to do a cabin move. When there's somebody with mobility issues and I know that it's safer for them to be closer to the facility. After action reviews, super important, and I love that this was mentioned before. Debriefs are super important. I like to do 2 debriefs, one immediately after the incident, check in, give them time to reflect, let them know what supports are available. You should be able to have the employee assistance program readily available for any staff who may have encountered some, traumatic event, making sure that they know that they're supported, that they have resources available to them. And then a debrief the next day, right? That's where you're having the communication, you're more strategic. What could I have done better? Where could I have maybe implemented a process that wasn't being implemented? Where were you guys? What can I do better? What can they do better next time? These are very important conversations to have whenever you're considering an evacuation or any type of emergency response planning. Overdose is a big example of one. If there's, God forbid, a fatality on site, how are you going to wrap around not just your residents, but your staff?